Oh, just ignore that. Carry on. You're muted, sir. Your TARDIS is muted. There you go.
You have too much noise, and I have too little. All right, so here we are, back again. A day late. Sorry about that.
and maybe $1 short too.
we're a few grotsits short of an entire Star Cruiser. But yes, welcome to Rassilon Omega and that other guy. And despite the fact that we are late, this isn't actually a TARDIS episode. This is one of our episodes where we're going to dive into the secret lore of the Time Lords. So if you've been enjoying the show, subscribe and like, and we will look forward to keep continuing to bring it to you. So unfortunately, we were able to make it a day late. The other is not here. The other is apparently, last I heard, is still waiting for Tecteun to pick her up. So at the dimension port. And so hopefully Tecteun will get there and give her a ride. But at the moment, it's just the two of us. So maybe next week.
It'd be cool if the other actually one day made it, just saying other. Just like.
Yeah. Or, she could at least have the decency to stop cashing the paychecks. But
well, we did disable the tracky bits on our TARDIS here, so it is hard to find us as you know. So.
Yeah, well, I mean, you can find us at allthingstimelord.com.
That's true.
You can also find Carl Gruff as he's going by today at Starfleet Boy.
Yes, that's right. Starfleet. Just Google Starfleet Boy. I'm on all the things.
Yes,
including TikTok, despite not realizing something really cool about it.
Unfortunately, there is no Time Lord TikTok for Rassilon Omega and that other guy, but there is Starfleet Boy TikTok.
The funny thing is there should be a Time Lord TikTok because it kind of the name itself lends to Time Lordy stuff. So
yeah, I'm
tasking you.
I suppose I feel less and less inclined to hop on Twitter these days. So maybe it's time to.
It's getting rough. It's getting rough on
that
Twitter.
Talk.
I'll be on Twitter. I'm like one of those people who have to see the train. Or the ship sink, make sure it goes under. So I'll be watching what's going. I'll turn into a watcher at some point. But yeah, it's hard.
I have to admit, some of my favorite Doctor Who writers are on Twitter, so it's kind of hard for me to walk away from getting to find out what their bits of wisdom. So. But other things you can find out online are bits of Doctor Who news. And one of the bits I thought was terribly cool was that the Guinness World Book of Records has confirmed that Doctor Who has earned yet another entry in its book. It is now Doctor Who now holds the record for longest gap between TV appearances of an actor playing a television character. So. It's now held by William Russell for his portrayal of companion Ian Chesterton, who last appeared in The Chase on June 26, 1965, and then appeared more recently on October 23rd, 2022, for a gap of 57 years, 120 days, which beats the previous record holder, which was 43 years.
And we're hoping someone else beats him in the 60th.
Yes. So, because Susan left Susan left earlier, but she came back in the Five Doctors. So it's gonna be
so it wouldn't count, right?
Yeah, because she showed up on the show, playing her original role.
Yeah. Okay. So then, good job.
Yeah, I
Ian.
think Russell's got it all sewn up. So,
Yeah, Ian's got
um,
yeah. So there you go, William Russell, you've got it.
other records Doctor Who holds in the Guinness World Book of Records is most consecutive sci-fi TV episodes ever, with 871 episodes so far.
Wow.
That's sci-fi TV, so obviously there are some soap operas that blow that out of the water. But
Right. You can't count soap operas. They don't. I mean, they count. They're if you like soap operas, I'm not trying to knock you here, but they just run forever. There's soap operas that are like what 20, 30, no more, like 60 years old, I think.
yeah, there are soap operas that started as radio dramas and then went to
Yeah.
TV when TV
Oh
became a
wow.
thing, and then
That's
they
pretty
keep still
interesting.
making them.
Yeah, you can't really catch up to that. That's a tough
Yeah,
thing.
yeah. Doctor Who might someday have the record for longest run of episodes where longest run of existing episodes, because most of those soap operas are gone. Nobody saved all those episodes. So another one is the 2013 simulcast broadcast of Day of the Doctors to 94 countries all at once, which has the largest world ever simulcast of a TV drama. Wow. And my favorite one, most number of novels written about a single character. So there are more
semi-Who
more novels starring the Doctor than any other fictional character out there.
Starting next year, Sherlock Holmes becomes public domain, the stories and the character. So Doctor Who can go nuts with...
I thought the early Sherlock Holmes stuff already was public domain, but
I think the whole thing will enter into the public
domain. Yeah, they didn't have Moriarty. Moriarty was in public domain and some of the later stuff. So yeah. Finally, Star Trek will be able to not worry about legal snafus when they have Moriarty show up.
They can definitely. Maybe that's why they couldn't do it till next year.
Now we can get Star Trek Moriarty, an entire series.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing!
Nothing but Moriarty.
Maybe that's a good point.
Well, did you have any other news?
There's been a little bit of little things out there. I haven't read anything official, but just some cool stuff about the what would it be, the 14th Doctor, the Bridge Doctor, as some are calling him. There's a rumor. I guess we could call this the rumor portion real quick, right?
Sure.
So the 14th Doctor has come about because Ncuti was shooting something else and wasn't available, and Russell T Davies didn't want to have just like a hiatus,
especially over the 60th.
Right, over the 60th. So his way of doing it, which totally makes sense. Yeah, I kind of see where this Doctor is going to fit in now in terms of honoring the past, multi-Doctor perhaps, extravaganza over 4. He's going to get 4 episodes too. That's the other cool thing. Or 3 episodes, I think.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, so that's neat too.
I've heard both.
10th Doctor doesn't just do one special. Like he has to come back and do 4 special.
Are you saying he's a very special Doctor?
He's a very special. We've already established that in our previous discussions, that he's the most Doctor.
Yes, he does seem to have. He monopolized so far 3 incarnations.
That's what I'm going to start calling him. He's the most Doctor. Forget the Bridge Doctor. He's the most Doctor.
Well, sadly, there is no Doctor in our current story for today. Because for today we are going to delve back deep into the history of the Time Lords, to the point where all historical records cease to exist and all that is left is bits of mythology and fairy tales. And we are going to take a look at one of the stories from this book here, Doctor Who Time Lord Fairy Tales. Specifically, we're going to look at the 3 brothers Gruff. This book was the Time Lord Fairy Tales book was released by BBC Children's Books in October of 2015 AD in the Humanian era, and the entire book is written by Justin Richards, who, if you follow Doctor Who novels, is quite a name. He is probably in the Time Lord Time Lord centric circles, most famous for creating the Doctor's brother Braxiatel.
Who we met.
You met?
Wasn't Braxiatel in the Escape from Gallifrey audio drama?
No, that was his Quince's, the great
oh, you're right.
Yeah,
how do I know,
uncle or something like granduncle.
What did we hear Braxiatel in?
I think I've mentioned him and talked about him a bit when I was talking about the House of Lungbarrow.
That's right. That's what it was. Okay.
Yeah. So Braxiatel is a big deal. He became a major player in the Benny spin-off series, but he's shown up in the Gallifrey audio series and in several Doctor Who novels, which Ray first premiered. And Justin Richards has written a bunch of Doctor Who novels and actually show ran the Doctor Who line throughout the last stretch of it, for the last stretch of the Eighth Doctor era of the books. So yeah, Justin Richards is a very big deal in Doctor Who. And I got an email from him once when I tried to get him to publish my TARDIS technical index. So he said no, but he loved it. He said they only want to publish stuff for New Who, and your book's filled with stuff from Classic Who. Which at the time they were very much ignoring Classic Who and focusing entirely on New Who. So I didn't get my book published. But it's for free. I just said, well, if the BBC is not going to make money off my TARDIS book, the BBC is not going to make money off of anybody else's TARDIS book, because I wrote the best one in the world. And if you go to allthingstimelord.com, you can download the PDF of my TARDIS technical index right now.
I can attest that it is the best technical book about the TARDIS, and it is free and you can download it. I did it.
It's so useful having you here. People would all think I'm lying. Thank you for the kind words. It is, however, a tad out of date. It was written before Journey to the Center of the TARDIS came out, and I'm still working on the revisions. So I will apologize for any omissions that anything that was published after from Journey to the Center of the TARDIS onwards is not in there, and I apologize for that. I'm working on fixing it, but working. Need a time machine to get all this stuff done on time. So the three brothers Gruff. The inspirations for this story, most obviously, is the Sontaran experiment. It's hard to overstate just how inspired by the Sontaran experiments, the Tom Baker story, the TV story, the Sontaran experiment. This story is
right.
To the point where I kind of feel it's actually maybe more of a ripoff. There are a couple of elements from the Dominators in here as well, and one could if anyone tries to argue that this is an accident, no. Justin Richards has no doubt watched the Dominators and the Sontaran experiment probably more times than I have. He is very familiar with these stories. It's not a coincidence. So yes, and there's the cover to the separate CD release read by Paul McGann. So
nice.
Yep. So if you don't want to get the audio, so let's talk about the space-time coordinates for this story a bit. I guess back it up to the previous slide there. Oh no, yeah, you're right. No, back it up. No, I was right. Okay, sorry. I rearranged things a bit. So
gotcha.
Now I'm confusing myself. These notes are supposed to make things flow smoother, not confuse me.
Don't tell the audience we have notes. Don't let them know
we're all-knowing Time Lords with thousands of years of experience behind us. Space-time coordinates. That's a tricky one. This is a fairy tale, and I think we can obviously accept that pretty much everything in this book has gone through a few retellings and revisions, and it is not considered true history because the Time Lords themselves admit they don't have any true historical documents from this far back in Gallifreyan history. So we are left with these remnant fairy tales to try to guess at what it might have actually been like back then, and how much of this is necessarily true is somewhat debatable, but it is the best we've got, except for some areas of Doctor Who we've actually visited, like in a story somebody goes back in time, but a lot of what we have from this era are myths, legends, and fairy tales. We have the Sontaran Starn claims that the people of Gallifrey are primitive. And so obviously in comparison to the Sontarans, he is what he's making that statement to. And Sontarans are a little biased, but the brothers Gruff in this deal with a long trip by walking, possibly for days. That's how they get there. They don't get a taxi or an air car or a train or ride a horse even. They walk. Right. When they meet Starn, they assume he's a troll, not an alien, which again kind of points to a lower end of the, whereas today if you ran into even if somebody who knew nothing about Doctor Who ran into a Sontaran, space alien would at least be on the card of possible explanations for that person who saw it. They might assume it's something magical, but they're just as likely to assume this must be a space alien.
But even if they knew, I think it'd be totally fine to call a Sontaran a troll.
Well, yes, I'm just, as far as dating this seems like this is a even before aliens have really been conceived of type of Gallifrey.
Similar to Earth's pre-industrial kind of Chaucer's world, I would say, maybe perhaps, well, older, because trolls weren't, they mentioned trolls in their literature, but
it's certainly, it seems to be their best way to understand what they're seeing is to assume it must be some sort of troll. However, Naz seems to be aware of how explosions work, because he tells everyone to get down before the ship blows up, which kind of points to maybe they do have gunpowder. Maybe Naz has at least read about gunpowder or seen it used in a show or something.
And there's no reason why Gallifreyans couldn't have. I mean, we invented things in a certain order, but maybe Gallifreyans invented them in a different order.
Yes. I mean, obviously I believe the Chinese had gunpowder vastly before everyone else in the world, Earth had it. So we can definitely say we're sometime around the beginning of the age of the Pythias. And in general parlance, this is around 3.5 billion BC, from Earth's perspective, and is what's known as the Bright Past. From Starn's point of view, he says it's been a few centuries since the beginning of the Rutan Sontaran War, but that appears to not actually heat up until the time of Rassilon. So is this a time-traveling Sontaran? We know they have time travel technology. So maybe this is a Sontaran from some part well ahead of Gallifrey's relative time, because it kind of looks like the Sontaran War hasn't really started yet, from most other sources. So yeah, it's a bit puzzling. I think it's safer to...
with their mission of reconnaissance, though. It would be like send the time fleet back to,
invade Gallifrey before they become powerful and dangerous.
Right.
That would make some sense of things.
It could also be a post Time War time traveling Sontaran who doesn't know what Gallifrey is, and might have, because remember, for a while people would approach the Doctor and be like, oh, like as if Gallifrey was a legend somehow, because if in fact the Time Lords lose the Time War, they lose time altogether, meaning they could have been erased from history completely. Like there's all kinds of things.
It seemed like there were lots of temporally active or time-aware species that did at least know that the Time Lords were something that once existed.
Yeah, exactly.
And I kind of hedged towards probably not a Sontaran from that far in the galactic mean time, because then the Sontarans we run into then seem to have been at war for like millions of years.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
And this time they say it's only a few centuries after the beginning of the Sontaran Rutan War.
Rutan War, okay.
So that's actually really early in the conflict, relatively speaking. So yeah, I wish I could say better exactly when this is set, but it seems kind of low tech. Don't you got the feeling of Chaucer?
Or even
kind of
before now.
levels?
Now I'm thinking of it. It's even before like writing. You know, like kind of.
It could be.
Yeah.
I don't remember if he actually manages to recognize any text on the screen, but yeah, it seems to be pretty early. So I wish I could give you more precise coordinates, but it's just a little vague. It's a fairy tale. It might not have even happened. There might not even be a date to chase down. But let's take a look at what has gone before. Around 10 million years before the Eye of Harmony is created. So we're still around 3.5 billion BC. The Shobogans begin as a level 1 society mastering fire on the planet Gallifrey. These warlike humanoids called themselves Shobogans, and they due to the untempered schism, they might have developed a way of measuring time instinctively as a survival trait. Maybe the untempered schism messed with time, because they were apparently somewhat time sensitive from day one, and this could also perhaps explain why they're obsessed with conquering time at later point.
Right.
I do want to say that 10 million years before the Eye of Harmony date is a very frustrating one for me. I somehow managed to delete my notation of where that came from, but I retained the information that it came from, retained the notes that it was an actual verified date, but I somehow deleted the reference. So, and I've never managed to dig it back up again. So if anyone manages to finds out why we know that the Gallifreyan civilization kind of started mastering fire and stuff around 10 million years before the Eye of Harmony, please let me know out there, because I have struggled for years, decades, to try to recapture where did I get that date. I'm quite confident that I pulled it from something, because I color coded it and everything by source, so it was from one of the novels. But yeah, it's frustrating. So
that is interesting. Yeah. Hopefully someone in the audience knows and like surprises you. That would be cool.
And now we're going to skip forward a little bit to a mere 500,000 years. So we're going to basically skip 9.5 million years forward in time from the mastering of fire. Where did we hear about that? Oh yes, Unearthly Child. Anyway, for the mastering of fire, we have 9.5 million years later, the Gallifreyans are building numerous walled cities all over the planet. In this modern era, in the modern era of Gallifrey, there are still no historical records from this time, when Gallifreyans wore animal hides and used spears. But we're only about 500,000 years from manned spaceflight. So we skip forward again to a mere 4,250 years before the invention of faster than light travel. I would wondered where the presidential cat had gotten.
He wants to be held, so I'm holding him. But they only want to be held for like 2 seconds, and then they're done.
So yes, we're now at about 8 million years before the Eye of Harmony. The date of 4,200 years before the invention of Gallifreyan invention of hyperdrive is based actually on a fanzine, the Apocrypha fanzine. And I know what you're saying. Well, that's just fan fiction. And you'd be right. But the Apocrypha fanzine, which I think only ran for 3 issues, so I've been told, although I only own the first two, anyone who has a copy of issue 3, I would pay money for a copy of this, even if you just run it off on a photograph copier or take pictures with your phone. I would pay money for the copy of issue 3 of Apocrypha. But it's very much a Gallifreyan lore thing. And the unique thing about Apocrypha, maybe not completely unique, but it's the thing that makes it special, is that several of the events in this fanzine were referenced in actual licensed Doctor Who novels. And one of the characters was actually basically, with a slight renaming, exported straight out of the fanzine and became the main bad guy for an entire season of the Gallifrey audio dramas by Big Finish. So,
Oh wow.
So yeah, they're like, yes, just fan fiction, never approved by the BBC or anybody else associated with authority over Doctor Who. But some of these events and characters have shown up in licensed Doctor Who. So I feel it's kind of a gray area, or rather a white area. If you click on my website, the text appears in white because which is fanon, but it is a special sort of fanon that I feel might be worth mentioning. And according to them, the Gallifreyans enter the Bronze Age around 4,250 years before they invented hyperdrive. So, take that as you will. If you want to throw that number out and believe it's a different number, it's your number's as good as mine. Well, it's not my number, but your number's as good as these guys's. The Gallifreyans enter the Bronze Age and then eventually reach the Iron Age of a level 2 civilization. These early Gallifreyans had many wars, periods of regression, and periods of progress. Telepathy starts becoming common among the Gallifreyans around this time.
I have a quick question.
Yes.
The level civilization, is that based on the Kardashev scale?
No. This
I was
is
gonna
based
say,
off
because
of,
we're not even a level 1 on Kardashev.
This is actually built off Romana's comment that 20th century Earth is a level 5 civilization, which is cropped up in New Who several times. They've referred.
So it's the
Earth
Gallifreyan scale of civilization.
Yes, it's a Gallifreyan scale.
Okay, got it. Thank you. Sorry about that. I was just because I was just like, Kardashev scale. That's not true. We're not. Yeah. We're not even a level 1 civilization. How did the Gallifreyans do this?
Which, fortunately, it was carefully outlined in the newer Doctor Who role-playing game by Cubicle 7, which had all the different levels defined. So that was very helpful and licensed by the BBC. But telepathy starts becoming common among the Gallifreyans, and that's probably a mutation caused by exposure to the untempered schism. So it might be that some of the Gallifreyans who lived near the schism developed telepathy, and then that gave them a bonus trait from a survival of the fittest point of view to pass their genes along, and gave them advantages until all of the Gallifreyans were had psionic abilities. Each city on Gallifrey developed its own academia to train these telepaths. That, again, is from Apocrypha, so might not be true, but that's from the fanzine. We do know that these academias existed, and they were run by the priests of the Menti Celesti. Whether or not they were developed to train telepaths is potentially apocryphal, or probably is apocryphal, but they did exist, and they were run by the priests of the Menti Celesti. These Menti Celestis are the Menti Celesti are the Gallifreyan gods. And at this point are made up of pain and time, though more of them would be added to the roster as time went by.
Pain and time. Wow.
Yes. The Menti Celesti are abstract, universal conceptual entities, a non-corporeal beings that can control time and fate. And we are going to get into a lot more detail about the Menti Celesti in an upcoming episode. I'm going to kind of skip over them for now, but there will be an entire episode devoted to them coming very soon, hopefully before we hit the new year. Early in their history,
they have a really cool name. I just gotta say, Menti Celesti.
That is another Mark Platt. Remember how Mark Platt is that name that keeps coming up in relation to Gallifrey, and he keeps telling the story of how Susan and the Doctor leave Gallifrey. That's right. Mark Platt. He came up with that name. That's very cool. So, early in their history, the Gallifreyans came to believe that if they killed all the evil people in the universe, then the good people who remained would become evil. They came to believe that light could not exist without darkness, which is a bit Alan Watts, a philosopher that I tend to admire, and that if evil was destroyed, then good would vanish as well. So the other thing a little tidbit I found someplace was that the bodies of dead Shobogans were usually burned on a pyre. That was a traditional way you get rid of bodies back then, was burn them. So they were really into cremation. So there's a little bit about that. Then we've got about jump forward another 1,000 years, and according to the, again, Apocrypha books, the walled cities of Gallifrey became the capitals of various city-states and were ruled by city warlords. And skip forward another 100 years, and the ability to see the future becomes an ability that can only be obtained. Again, that date is from this book, but the information is all verified from the novels and stuff. It's just the date is pulled from the book.
Right.
The ability to see the future becomes an ability that can only be attained by female telepaths. These visionaries develop their powers by staring into the untempered schism, but the development of this precognition was still very rare, even among the females, the women, or girls even, I suppose. Their minds were connected and nearly merged with the astral vortex, as it was called back then, that you could see in the untempered schism. And they could see the future of specific people, places, and species in amazing detail. Those women who spent too much time with their minds in the vortex became very disconnected from reality and somewhat catatonic. We see one of these women in The End of Time, advising Rassilon and the Inner Council. Remember the woman with the pen
Yes,
scribbling
absolutely.
away? Yes, she was one of those visionaries who spent too much time staring into the vortex, but still had powerful precognition abilities. According to the Apocrypha fanzines, the city of Prydos, which is a real city on Gallifrey, the Order of the Sisterhood starts gaining such power and foresight that it comes to dominate the cities of Gallifrey's southern continent. So, and that appears to be about what happened. I'm guessing broadly where we are when this story takes place. When we get to the three brothers Gruff, which the brothers Carl, Meklan, and Naze Gruff are all captured by a Sontaran named Starn, who experiments on them to determine if Gallifreyans can be easily conquered. The brothers kill Starn before he can make his report to the Sontaran Assessment Survey. And this story becomes a popular fairy tale told to time tots. Given that Starn is at war with the Rootans and has interacted, as we're going to discuss, with humans, it seems likely that he has been sent back in time to facilitate an invasion of time by capturing Gallifrey before the Time Lords, the Gallifreyans, can defend themselves. Or maybe it's a different Starn and he just has a very common name. That's always a possibility.
I think that's like very likely. Yeah. Like, it could be a different Starn. Like,
it would
Starn
solve
could be
some, yeah. It would solve some problems dating wise if Starn is actually just a name of the Kvetch. The Kvetch was the species the Sontarans arose from.
Right.
And it could have been that Starn was actually a Kvetch, but in modern retellings, as time went by, he just became called a Sontaran, even though the Sontarans hadn't formally arisen at that point.
It could also be that the Brothers Gruff story itself was revised from an older story to include the Sontarans, to make them ridiculous and to teach young time tots how easy it is to subdue a Sontaran, make them think you're stupid, keep them guessing, get them angry, make sure you're in packs of 3, and if all else fails, like hit that little
probic
vent and you're all good. There's like, I'm just I'm kind of quickly formulating it, but what I mean to say is that, like, it makes sense if you look at it in universe as a fairy tale for little time tots, like why they might even like have just added the Sontarans later after they'd had problems with them. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like
Well,
as propaganda.
the Kvetch probably were around back then. I don't know if they would have had space travel at this point.
Right.
And the Kvetch eventually produced the clones. I might be mispronouncing that word, but it's
So
something
yeah,
like
you're
that.
right. They might have been Kvetch in the
Yeah.
original.
Whether or
Star
not
Wars
they had time travel, or sorry, whether or not they even had space travel to visit Gallifrey at this point is kind of up in the air.
Right.
Because the Gallifreyans was one of the first species to develop space travel, and clearly these Gallifreyans don't have, the brothers don't have, haven't heard of spaceships or anything yet. So
wouldn't it be interesting also if, sorry, one more little side thought though.
No, go ahead.
Would it be interesting if that like Time Lords were so chuffed by our fairy tales that they were like, well, we never had fairy tales, so let's just make some up based on these Earth fairy tales? But no, I don't think that happened. The Doctor might have done that.
Yeah. There's a lot of weirdness with fairy tales in Doctor Who in general. Mm-hmm. Like the episode The Underworld, the events are so close to Jason's quest for the Golden Fleece.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
So absolutely a sci-fi version of that the Doctor actually can't help but say, this whole thing is exactly like that story. Maybe that was actually a prophecy of these events rather than something that happened in Earth's past.
Oh, interesting.
And he doesn't really follow it up on that, but it's thrown out there that these fairy tales might be echoes of things that happen in other times and other planets that have somehow settled on Earth into Earth's culture.
I get the impression that Earth is like a unique situation because just based on the Doctor's affinity for Earthlings in general, just on the scale of the universe, for whatever, they say that like if you travel far enough in the universe, you can get to a point where you'll encounter a very similar set of circumstances like you'll just encounter another Earth, like basically, or another Gallifrey, if you will, another Time Lords or whatever. So while we may not be on the same sort of trajectory, it could be very possible that we're far enough away from the Time Lords that we kind of developed similarly to them, and that's why we have similar, for whatever reasons, we have a very similar kind of like thing. And so maybe the Doctor's fond of humans because we remind him so much of these stories that he heard when he was like a kid and stuff like that, or they heard, rather, I should say.
It's possible. It's certainly the interaction of fairy tales and mythology in Doctor Who, both with Earth and Gallifreyan, is very complex. You'll find that most of these fairy tales have a strong resemblance to one Earth fairy tale or another Earth fairy tale.
and that's also artistic license on the writer's part. But I do want to say that,
but
like,
from an in-universe point of view, it says interesting things about how the universe works and how fiction works in that universe.
Also, I do want to point out, just because I'm reminded of it, Doctor Who's one of the few shows where it exists on a truly universal level. I mean, like they go to other like when we see the Doctor and companions traveling, sometimes they're in other galaxies, and who knows how far away the galaxies are from the Milky Way, for example. It's not a show confined to like an alpha quadrant or a beta quadrant. It's like we're talking about a scale that, like, if you watch these like science documentary things where they start zooming out, it's like that. Like we're seeing, like,
I mean, it might be able to, I don't even, it doesn't even, it's bigger even than oh god, blanking on it, Kevin Sorbo, Gene Roddenberry's Andromeda. That's it.
Oh yeah,
where
exactly.
They can easily travel to other galaxies, or Stargate, which also ends up by the end of its franchise running around very, very, very far away from Earth's galaxy.
Yeah. So it's very possible that Earth, there could be many of these like events because of the distances that are similar.
Yeah. So anyway, let's see, there are some prequels to this. I didn't even realize it till I started researching for this episode. But Starn has shown up in 2 other stories. The first one, I should have caught. I feel really stupid. Starn is in another one of the fairy tales. Starn is in The Three Little Sontarans earlier on in this book. And he is the one Sontaran who survives the fight with the Rootans. That's how we know that the Rootan War has been going on for a few centuries, is because he's in this other story and he mentions that. And that's about the only dating clue we have for that episode.
That's pretty funny.
So Starn survives that to get killed here, but Starn actually originates, and this blew my mind, in a BBV audio drama, not Big Finish, BBV. And I think I have the cover for that there, if you want to bring that up.
Yep. Sorry.
So BBV was one of Big Finish and BBV were both started doing Doctor Who-esque audio dramas back in the 90s. And were kind of, I mean, a perhaps friendly competition, but they were definitely at the level where they would get the rights to the Sontarans, for example, and make some Sontaran stories and sell them, because Robert Holmes's estate was quite happy to rent out the Sontarans for a fairly nominal fee. And BBV did some cool stuff. It tended to be a lot more atmospheric, much more kind of new Battlestar Galactic-y, in dark and grim and moody and plunging the depths of the soul kind of stuff. Whereas the other Big Finish tended to be a lot more upbeat and more adventure kind of thing. Obviously Big Finish ended up getting the Doctor Who license, though there have been discussion of what would the alternate timeline have looked like if BBV had gotten it. But BBV wrote The Silent Warrior, a story about a spaceship filled with humans, and a criminal ends up basically hiring a Sontaran to do something or other, and that doesn't go well. And that Sontaran is Field Major Starn. So
very cool.
Back in 1999. That's that was where Starn, and now again, maybe Starn is the equivalent of John in the Sontaran Empire, and all these Starns are different Starns. It's possible.
I think that's like very probable, in fact. But I like the idea of, I do like the idea, and also, well, in a sense, maybe there could be like lineages in the cloning groups, right? Like, so they are cloned after all. So maybe there's a Starn clone group. You know, like, so everyone in that group is Starn.
Yeah, maybe Starn is his last name, his family name for the batch of clones. That also is possible. Justin Richards is a huge Doctor Who fan, so it's quite possible he had actually listened to The Silent Warrior. He might have even been friends with Peter Gren, who wrote it, and done it as a bit of a little hat tip. Or maybe Starn is such a generic Sontaran name that maybe he just accidentally put the same syllables together. But
that'd be hilarious if like John Smith is Starn.
Yeah,
like on the Sontaran homeworld. That'd be
funny. It is. It's also worth noting, for what it's worth, the fan-run Doctor Who Wikipedia says that they're all the same Starn. So maybe they might have actually done some research and talked to some people, Justin Richards, and asked if it was supposed to be the same Starn, and maybe that's what it's based on. But I was blown away. That was like, wow, Starn was alive back in 1999. That was a thing. Just Doctor Who, the Doctor Who continuity iceberg is way deeper than even I realize very often. All right, well, let's talk a little about the characters. As we mentioned, this is read by Paul McGann, so he plays everybody. I think we had a picture, the one picture from the story itself we could put up. And there we go. You can see our 3 brothers silhouetted and the backside of Starn. So, not necessarily the most informative picture that you could have. What were your thoughts on the brothers?
I like them. It reminded me of that kind of like, I guess the most recent example of it was in Harry Potter with the Paravel brother. Did you watch those films?
I've seen all the Harry Potter movies except the last two once, and I never got around to seeing the last two. Well, by
Well,
last two, I mean of the proper Harry Potter cycle, not
not the
the
new ones. Yeah.
prequels. I
Oh,
haven't seen
okay. Well,
any of the
there's a.
prequels, but
It's. I'll send you a link to the very short but beautiful animated sequence that tells the fairy tale of the Master Wand. And so it reminded me of that sequence, and I would love to actually see this story animated in a similar way. I think it'd be awesome if with the narration of Paul McGann, actually, if they animated this story, it'd be really fun in a very stylistic way. Maybe like some of these look like linoleum cuts. These images that you have here, they're really cool. So I assume they're from the book, right?
yes, yeah, the entire
Yeah,
book is illustrated in the style that you see there on the screen,
yeah.
and
It looks
every
like
story gets like a title. A title cut that is what you saw on the CD cover that I showed that you showed earlier, and
right.
oh, so many presidential kitties. This is the youngest incarnation.
Well, I remember seeing a lot of like linoleum cut printed art, like where you'd cut linoleum and then put ink on it and then print. Like that's what it
Yeah,
reminds me of, like the zine type of art or whatever.
yeah. I thought
So I
it was
really
more
dig it.
trying to do a woodcut thing, but I'm really not
Well,
a good
yeah,
person to
linoleum's
ask.
just the medium that I know, but yeah, you would do a woodcut, put some paint on it, and then like flatten it onto. You could print it that way. You could
Yeah,
print that way, which is a cool way to print. Actually, it's fun. Um, but going back to the story, yeah, it felt like very familiar. I can't name the specific fairy tale from I guess the Brothers Grimm would be the closest thing, like
well,
type
it
of
also
bringing
is.
it. It's like
They're also playing a little with the
Billy Goat
goats, the
Gruff. Yeah,
Billy
yeah,
Goats Gruff,
yeah, exactly, exactly.
where there
So
were three of those that were brothers, I think.
that's
So
right. That's right. So there's a lot of like things, but I did love it. I actually thought I was like, oh, how's this gonna be like, whatever. But I really enjoyed it. It really opened my mind to to Gallifrey having fairy tales. Like I hadn't like that's not something that I'd really thought of. And whether they're all great or not, I don't know yet because I haven't read the whole thing. But but just the idea of it is very delightful, and I can see. I think offline, did we talk about this? Like I can see myself using this like kind of thing to introduce a much younger than maybe is appropriate audience to start introducing the Doctor Who and science fiction and
Doctor
fairy
Who
tale.
gateway drug.
Right, exactly. So like, like kids that are too young to watch the show because it's too scary, maybe you could read some, like if you're a Doctor Who fan and you have kids, you could read these to them. I think it's kind of delightful. So but I did not read this one. I listened to Paul McGann, and I was in heaven the whole time. I listened to it 3 times, by the way, Brian. Just so you
Whoa.
know.
Okay.
Yeah, I love Paul McGann's reading. It was like intoxicating. So
Well,
yeah.
eventually there will be a whole lot of Paul McGann's if this show goes on long enough. So
So
a
yeah.
whole lot of Paul McGann audio dramas.
So yeah, exactly. So if you're listening, please subscribe and like this video so we get more attention.
Yes, I do want to say it's getting a little ahead, but yes, under the good, Paul McGann's magnificent in this. I kind of was just expecting him to phone it in because it was just kind of this story that his doctor's not even in, and I don't think he cares too much about Doctor Who outside of the convention circuit and the big finish, and I don't think he sits around watching it a bunch or something like that and collecting posters, not like David Tennant or something. So I was kind of like, wow, he's really giving it his all. He's absolutely nailing this. Good job for him. So yeah, there are audios of all of these read by different people. I think all of the readers are somebody in Doctor Who. So
Oh, cool.
like Paul McGann. I think they've got might have a few other doctors in there too. So I know they have some companions. So, but yes, we've got Naze, the clever one, Melcan, the brave one, and Carl. Which I can't help but think of the Terminator named Carl. What was it? most recent Terminator film.
Oh yeah, you're right. You're totally
Yeah,
right.
yeah, he was just going. He was like, "Oh, this is Carl's."
I thought it was like a fun nod to how every now and then the doctor will like put in an ordinary name
Yeah,
with someone he knows. Like, what does he say? Like, oh, someone says Santa Claus. Oh yeah, that's Pete or something. You know, I
yeah,
don't
yeah. Yeah,
know.
and it's fun, and it's very Doctor Who. Nah, the Gallifreyans, the Shobogans, Nas, Melcan, and Carl
Right.
Gruff of the House of Gruff. I guess I don't know. They don't seem like nobility, so I don't know if you'd say the House of Gruff. Maybe that became a thing later on, but I don't know if they were really, that sort of things going on at this social class. Though they clearly are not too poor. They have a bunch of employees that work for them at their farm, and
Right.
that can run the place when they're gone. So they do walk to town to buy their stuff. So, and not ride a horse or any Gallifreyan equivalent. So I don't know. It's hard to say. Yeah, they might have looked like that. I don't know. They might have been more high tech. That the silhouettes in this picture are maddeningly vague that we were looking at earlier. So, but yes, we've got the brave one, the strong one, and the clever one. And we find out that being clever is the best way to be. That the Sontaran easily outdoes the other two, but cannot outdo the clever one.
Or like maybe that's the whole pillar of a Time Lord at this time, and that's maybe why clever, brave, and strong. Those are all three traits that don't do bad to develop. Like those are three. If you could become the,
but it's clear the clever one should be in charge.
Yeah, that's true. I agree. I think
it's
the
worth
brave
saying,
and the strong one would agree with that as well.
Yeah, no, they did. They outright said, "Oh, we knew you'd come up with a plan. Thank goodness you're here." They were very cool and about it. That the clever one should be the one making the decisions, and I think that certainly reflects a very Rassilon ideology. So one has to ask how much has this fairy tale been rewritten in the Rassilon era to support the values that Rassilon cared about? Because I don't think if it was written in the Pythia era, it would be the girl who was the clever one who came up with all the good ideas and vanquished everything in the age of the Pythia.
That's true.
So one has to suspect maybe Rassilon rewrote this, and because
I would say that it's a guarantee, Brian.
Or hired somebody to realize it.
Right,
because it doesn't fit too well in what we know about Shobogan culture, but it does fit fairly well in what we know about Gallifreyan culture as far as the ideas it pushes.
Rascally Rassilon.
Yeah. And then, do you have anything else? Any other thoughts on the three brothers?
Yeah, I think you summed it up really nicely. But I'll just say that like the thing that was cool was Paul McGann, again, the way he performed it. I really felt a distinct kind of like understanding that there were three characters. Like it didn't feel like they meshed. There was a slight difference or something. I don't know. He did something neat with it, with his reading. That like maybe it's just that I listened to it too many times. But
you could never listen to Paul McGann too many times.
But it was interesting to. I think also the other good thing about it was like, again, I don't know why I'm just so tuned into this idea of like, oh, this could be a good replacement for the fairy tales that I grew up listening to, because it's kind of a more modern take on it that like I think like it'll help a little bit more for like kids that are growing up now. That I think they get this a little bit more, having a little bit of space thrown in there and a little bit of sci-fi thrown in there, I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah, I'm a bit of a whore for Joseph Campbell, and Campbell, who loves all the old mythology and was always trying to get his hands on as much old mythology as he could crammed into his brain. But he was very adamant that the mythology needs to be for the time of that it is, and old mythology often is not terribly applicable to the present. And so one could argue that
Star Wars, that's funny, Jinx.
Uh,
Carry on.
yeah, uh, things like Doctor Who and Star Wars are a much more appropriate mythology for the current era than a lot of the older stuff is.
Yeah.
I think
And what's beautiful is that they are actually very true to these older stories. Like the heart of it's there, and these new stories are being told by well learned, hopefully, but not always. But like I would say, like by mostly well learned people who know those old tales too. Like so
oh
it's kind of a
yes,
cool thing. Yeah,
yeah, it's great to reinvent these stories,
yeah.
and the Three Brothers Gruff is a reinvention of a 1970s Doctor Who TV episode called the Sontaran Experiment.
And a reinvention of a fairy tale that everyone
Yes,
grew up
yes.
reading. So yeah.
So, let's talk about Starn a little bit. Touch on him. He. My biggest observation was he was smart enough to survive 2 other adventures, but didn't make it through this one. he's clever enough to deal with Rootans and clever enough to deal with humans, but he is not clever enough to deal with that with Naz of the House of Gruff.
I mean, I just like I kind of saw him as the same. What was the that kind of voice? I just heard him as the most recent Sontarans that we saw. Like that same actor who does the voice. Very like
well, Dan Starkey has certainly spent more time on screen playing Sontarans than anyone else.
Like I guess that's who I imagined.
Yeah.
But
he is Strax among others. He's played other Sontarans as well, but
I'm personally going to say that these tales had to have been rewritten several times, just as we are rewriting our own tales here in real life land, because yeah, it is hard to believe after thinking about it, like that a Sontaran like in that level of tech would be around when there's Shobogans, the prehistoric, like the written Shobogans. So unless timey-wimey shenanigans are going on, it's just propaganda for kids. Like,
but it is true. A, the Sontarans did invade Gallifrey, and B, they do have time. They can send things forward and backward in time. So we can't entirely rule out the possibility that this is some sort of attempt to break into Gallifrey's history.
Yeah.
But so if you want it to be, this is real history, it can work. That's part of the reason I picked this one. A lot of the others in this book are clearly like they wear on their sleeve explicitly that this is not like there's a retelling of a kind of mashup of Little Red Riding Hood and Rose.
Right.
The first episode with Christopher Eccleston, and it's clearly it's clearly Rose. It's clearly that story. There's just being retold through some sort of mythological reprocessing, and so you can't really take anything. You can't take much of it at face value because it's clearly just a version of Rose that has been told over and over and over again until it's somehow turned into this. And there are other ones too that are just like, yeah, clearly this has been heavily doctored. I feel part of the use of the word.
Right. Nice. But in general, Starn to me was like, I mean, to me, I don't know how you feel about Sontarans, but I've never been scared of Sontarans personally. Like they just always seem very humorous, and like the fact that they look like potatoes, and like stuff like that. Has always made me kind of laugh and giggle at them. Like I've never, and they're, I don't know what this says about me as a person. I'm so sorry, but they just don't seem menacing, and they never really are. Like they're always defeated.
Yeah.
So like,
well, I mean, even when Robert Holmes first created them, they were created despite being a clone species, which feels like it should be the most monstery of monsters. Every Sontaran that Robert Holmes wrote has been a distinct individual with a very human outlook and perception and way of looking at things, despite being clones. So yeah, they weren't supposed to be. They were never meant to be the monster that rips through the wall and like something out of a horror movie. They're much more a Star Trek alien than they are a monster. From day one.
I get that too, but yeah, they just make me kind of laugh. I don't know. I think I'd be like I'd get a Centauran angry really fast if I met one because I'd just be like, oh, you don't intimidate me at all, Centauran. Sorry.
Yeah,
And then
they
he'd shout
are
at me and yell at me and all this
break
stuff.
your
And
neck.
yeah, but yeah, I know they're strong. I know they're formidable. Maybe that's the whole thing is that like
They
that's why
break
they
your neck, but you would die laughing.
yeah. Maybe that's their whole advantage. They just no one takes them as seriously as they should, like because they see a Sontaran and
I
they're like,
suppose that's
oh,
something, but their biggest weakness is that nobody takes them as seriously as they take themselves.
right.
They're so pretentious, no self-awareness whatsoever, and how ridiculous they look.
Looping back to Starn though, I did enjoy and again I heard it's funny, I know Paul McGann read it, but in my mind I heard it in like the classic Sontaran voice, even though he didn't do much of that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like he didn't like
I noticed what he would often do is he'd start it like he was impersonating Dan Starkey's strat, but then he would fade into normal dialogue as the line went on.
But it's
everything
so strange.
would start with a very Sontarny delivery,
it's true,
and then kind of trail off into a more casual delivery. Which I mean, having played Sontarns in tabletop role playing games, that voice wears your throat out after a while.
Oh, I'm sure, yeah. But regardless, what I mean to say is there was a dimensionality and individuality, as you pointed out, to Starn. Because I particularly enjoyed the discussion Starn was having. I guess who was it with Naze?
I think almost all the talking was with Naze. But
with Naze. But about the back and forth of like reveal your weakness to me and like and Naze is like, what if we don't have any weaknesses? What if I don't? What if our species doesn't have any weaknesses, which is very Gallifreyan, by the way. It's like so perfect. I was very happy to hear that. I was like, oh yes, this is like I know who you are.
There's again, this seems to fit well into the Time Lord mythology, despite being set clearly before that.
Yeah. I don't know if the real Naze would have been like this, but in that was a great moment because then he counters back with like, well, we've learned to turn our weaknesses into advantages, but this is the part that I think just my critique on Sontarans in general is like the arrogance of then revealing what the weakness is. Like that's where I would have stopped. I would have been like, yes, we've learned to turn our weaknesses into advantages, but I'm not going to tell you about this little, thing here.
This seems to be the fundamental flaw with the majority of Doctor Who villains. So much so that when the bad guy does not explain his evil plan to the prisoner, it's like a thing where oh, you think I'm just going to outline all my weaknesses to you, Doctor? No.
That's really funny.
It's actually like a plot beat when it doesn't happen because it happens so often.
But yeah, Starn was a cool character. I think you're right that I think I like that. I never thought about that, but yeah, now that I'm thinking back on the Sontaran characters we've all met, they all look the same, but they definitely are distinct, and it's a cool thing for an actor, I think, to bring out something. I think that's a cool thing to do.
Yeah. Well, let's see. Did you have any? Let me see. What else? What have I?
Well, we went to the good. We prematurely jumped into the good, but we haven't really done the good, the bad, and
I suppose yes, the good. It demonstrates the Gallifreyan value of intelligence and ingenuity over bravery and strength. It captures the importance of xenophobia in modern Gallifreyan culture and sets up other contact with other worlds as being a military conflict, which does fit that part does fit with what we are going to see in the coming the formation of the Gallifreyan Empire. The aliens are something you have to deal with on military terms is definitely something we are going to see. So I mean, I don't know if it's necessarily the greatest message for kids, but I do feel like, okay, that does feel like a very Gallifreyan fairy tale that has very Gallifreyan stuff. I haven't had a chance to check, but I'm pretty sure the line, licked a bloodless tongue over its
Oh yeah,
thin
that's
lip,
right.
rasping giving a rasping sigh. I'm pretty sure that's Terrence Dicks. Terrence Dicks was very famous for developing very evocative, memorable ways to describe various Doctor Who monsters and things, vehicles, sonic screwdrivers, all of that. And and he would use the same phrase every time that monster showed up in a new book, when he was novelizing all the old classic Who episodes. And some of those things became cliches that fans would throw around and quote to each other. That's how prevalent they were, because Terrence Dicks novelized so many stories. And I just feel like licked a bloodless tongue over his thin lip and having a rasping sigh as a description for a Sontaran is probably right out of The Time Warrior, the original Doctor Who, the novelization of The Time Warrior by Terrence Dicks. I'm pretty sure that's there. Didn't get a chance to look, but I bet you it's there. Did you have any other goods you wanted to highlight?
I think I kind of went over it, but like I think I give the big good prize today to Paul McGann for the reading. Yeah,
agreed. Now that we're getting into the bads, I'm not actually a big fan of this story. I mostly chose it because I wanted some stories from before the time of the Gallifreyan Empire and the Pythia became dominant, and this is one of the few that I felt was not too silly.
right.
The one of the few that felt like this might have actually happened. So I'm not actually, this is definitely not a TARDIS story. Totally awesome. Totally awesome review of a review discussion of a interesting story. But it is one of the few windows we have into this period. It is a complete ripoff of the Sontaran experiment, beat for beat the same. Fight the Sontaran, sabotage his ship blows up when he goes back to the ship. I guess here they drag him back to the ship, but it's still, very lots of beats. The tests the Sontaran is conducting are right out of there, and yes, some Sontarans are very protocol driven. Their experiments are probably the same on every species, but it's even the way we defeat the Sontaran is the same. So I don't know. I'm a little, yes, the kids that are meant to read this book will probably never have seen the Sontaran experiment, so it'll be fresh for them, but there's not a lot here. I didn't feel like there was a lot here unless you were a fanatic on Gallifreyan mythology, or if you were a kid who has not seen the Sontaran experiment. I also, as somebody, who's reading it for the Gallifreyan mythology, was a little disappointed that we're doing an entire story testing the bio of a Sontaran, testing and determining the biology of Shobogans, and we really don't learn anything about Gallifreyan biology in this. They could have at least told us how heavy that rod was that the strong Carl was holding up, so that we could know how strong a Gallifreyan is, because we get all these hints that Shobogans are stronger, tend to average stronger than humans, but we never actually get to hear what that means in pounds. Starn mentions he has prepared a detailed report about Gallifrey's environment, and we don't get to read or hear anything about it. So, I get it. They weren't really intending this to be a primer on Gallifrey when they wrote it, but I was a little disappointed.
My only bad is that I think a true Gallifreyan kid story would have shown how the Gallifreyan past is protected, and we would have found out that yes, Sontarans did do a temporal incursion into the past of Gallifrey. Yes, they were successful in achieving this. However, the brothers Gruff are actually time agents that knew that they were going to do this and foiled the Sontarans without contaminating the Sontarans into thinking, oh, they were foiled by Time Lords.
That would have been a way to do it.
I hate to do that kind of thing, but no, I just that's what the story inspired. Actually, was like it made me think how do Time Lords actually protect the Gallifreyan past? Like, there might be like interesting things like this
Oh
that
no,
they do.
we will definitely spend some time discussing that. There are
Awesome.
a few layers of defense, and which makes me think that perhaps if Starn is traveling in the past, how does he? When is this happening? When is the breach? What breach
Right.
in Gallifreyan's temporal defenses is he exploiting? Because otherwise, the Daleks would just be showing up, and Gallifreyan fairy tales would all be, and then the Daleks killed everybody.
Killed everybody. Yeah, that's true. I'll just say, like, in all seriousness, though, in the context of what the story is meant to be, like a fun little lark of kid stories or whatever, or like Gallifreyan things, there's not much bad about it from that perspective. And it's like you said, if you don't know the Sontaran experiment, you're not gonna get kind of like steamy about it. Like you're gonna be like, oh, this is fresh and new. I actually I know the Sontaran experiment, but I had forgot. Until you mentioned it, I was like, oh yeah. I had to be reminded myself because it's been so long. So,
well, good. Perhaps it is. I am just a little too obsessive of a Doctor Who fan for this tale. Maybe most Doctor Who fans loved it. So
it's not meant for you, Brian. It's meant for your offspring. No,
yeah, fair enough. My loomlings.
Your loomlings. That's better. Yeah, it's meant for your loomlings, right?
No, it's fair enough. The book is clearly pitched for kids, and I should perhaps putting an undue burden of, damn it, there's not enough continuity about Yaddlefish and Gumble Jackson here, so whatever.
Hey, this little 23-minute read or audio has inspired already an hour and 10 minutes of discussion. So yeah. I think it's done a great job as far as like setting up a good discussion here.
Yeah. The only wibbly wobbly thing I had to point out is that the Sontarans seem to be like from time traveling, probably, because he's got spaceships and FTL drive, and he's already, and if it's the same Starn, then he's also already been fighting the Rutan War for 3 centuries, but the Rutan War is not going to start for another for thousands of years, so, or maybe even millions of years. So
that is the wibbly wobbly is an interesting thing. I hope we get a follow-up in some weird way, or like some kind of reference to it, because it is an interesting thing.
I would say no one's ever going to follow up this story, but Starn has shown up. Starn has shown up in 3 stories so far.
Yeah,
if it's one thing we've learned, do not count Starn out.
Yeah, it's true.
He might have 10 years from now, he might have his own spin-off series on Big Finish.
The whole 60th anniversary is about explaining how the Sontarans went back in time to like this before to like a point before they should be able to. It's gonna be, the Doctor actually gives them time travel so that the story can be written, and then takes it away from them.
If we get far enough in this podcast, we will eventually get to do the Faction Paradox audios where the Time Lords hire the Sontarans to help them in a little side quest of the Time War. But that's once if we get to make it to the Time War. So all right, well, let's talk about some time lore. Let's see. The Shobogans, the pre-curse Gallifreyans. What we know is the constructors of destiny, we've talked a little bit about this, modified the Gallifreyan Neanderthals to fulfill their destiny, becoming one of the first of the great races. And we know the exposure to the untempered schism over billions of years of evolution allowed the Gallifreyans to become sensitive to time and its movement. And we know a species that lives next to a wormhole for even a few centuries will experience mutations. And we also know that there's Zyton ore in the rocks of Gallifrey, which would alter their morphic fields based on their perceptions. And as we had spent a whole episode discussing in our full circle review, it is possible that these early Shobogans might have had telepathic, adaptive, and healing abilities similar to the Marshmen from Malzerius. But yeah, the Shobogans, which we didn't even know were called Shobogans until Chris Chibnall told us very recently. We thought they were called Gallifreyans back then, but apparently Shobogans was the term before then. And the planet was called Gallifrey, but the people were called Shobogans.
Wait, when did Shobogan? Because I've known about Shobogans for a long time.
Shobogans were mentioned all the way back in Deadly Assassin, but they were then the term was then used to describe people. Well, it was a little unclear. It kind of sounded like hoodlum. Yeah, it sounded like hoodlums or something, the way it was first used.
That's right.
Or hippies or something. But and that is what in the modern Gallifreyan era, that is what the term is used for to refer to people who have rejected Rassilon's cultural and monolith. You do not follow the Time Lord or the Gallifreyan culture.
It's a cool word, Shobogan. I mean, it's kind of a cool.
Robert
Holmes
sticks
with you.
Everything that's good about the Time Lords rolls right downhill into the lap of Robert Holmes.
But so I didn't realize. So Chibnall is who gave us this like kind of like deeper view of the Shobogan.
Revealed the etymology of the word.
Yeah.
So the Shobogans are the first sapient humanoids to appear in the universe. Before this event, causality is largely structureless and at the mercy of those who could wield odic energy, which is literally magic. Odic energy is literally magic. Because of this. And it appears to also be the foundation for Odin in some way, because there's the energy that cancels out odic energy is like Lokic magic or Lokic energy or something like Loki. So, but we'll talk a little bit more about the magic, how magical the universe was during the bright pasts. Because they are the first sapient species to evolve naturally from the ancestor cell, they have a direct effect on the space-time continuum of this universe. Only sapient beings can collapse quantum phenomenon and crystallize history, turning it from a quantum possibility that maybe this cat is alive and maybe this cat is dead, until the observation of sapient beings is what collapses those probability fields in the Doctor Who universe.
It's fascinating because that's actually turning out to be there's like some really good physics stuff that's kind of well, anyways, I don't want to get into that tangent now because I'm not as learned. I'm not a physicist, but I will just say that this seems vaguely it seems a little familiar in concept.
Yes, it is. It is inspired by the quantum theories and stuff, and was developed in the Doctor Who novels.
I see. Okay,
but the idea is in the Doctor Who universe, only sapient beings collapse quantum waveforms, and that for non-sapient beings, everything's a quantum probability field. And history is not defined until it is observed by a sapient being. And biodata is a space-time map of this crystallization. Thus, only sapient beings, organic or technological, have biodata. Functions as a form of time DNA, which defines a sapient being's reach and span in space as well as time. Your biodata is not just your physical you now, it's you in the future and you in the past, and also everything you perceived throughout your entire timeline is your biodata.
Did we see the Doctor's biodata on Trenzalore?
Yes, in certain circumstances, your biodata can be rubbed raw and exposed to normal space, and that's what we're seeing there is the Doctor's exposed biodata. That's
fascinating.
So basically, the little tail end of his existence. So as a sapient observes the quantum flux of the universe, he collapses all the quantum uncertainties into facts. Thus, it represents. Thus, it is that perception of the universe defines the universe, and making meaning of the universe makes meaning of the universe its primary foundation, meaning, understanding, perception is the foundation of reality in the Doctor Who universe. And a whole lot of the goofy, how the heck did that piece of science work, makes a little more sense, a little bit, if you realize this. Perception defines reality. And as a sapient lives, he creates strands of meaning and understanding that mark out all he sees and perceives. These are his biodata strands. The Shobogans are made of biodata, and they are one of the first to impose meaning on the universe by their observations. As these early Shobogans observe the universe, they unconsciously set down laws to predict its actions. Their observations physically begin to create the rules by which the universe operates. The Shobogans are also create the first civilization as we humans would understand the term.
Very cool.
So, are Time Lords important? Are Gallifreyans important? Yeah, kinda. They're kind
but
of.
Also, just like this is the kind. I love this this particular kind of thing that you've brought up, because I really dig, I really dig like the quantum theory and all that stuff, and string theory, and things like that. And if I could fit it into Time Lord somehow, creating all of that, I'm down for it.
No.
That's awesome.
The novels of the 90s went to great lengths,
That's awesome.
and after that to tangle up the greatness, the power of the Gallifreyans and the importance of the Gallifreyans with quantum theory. So,
but that's an interesting concept also, because it's cool to understand that there could, it's possible there had to have been a first civilization. It makes complete sense. Like there's got to have been a first something. Like we may not know who they are ever, but they certainly precede us, because the universe is old enough and has been stable enough for there to be a civilization that predates human civilization. Some people think we might be the first ones, but I don't believe that.
Oh no, we know that the first ones have to be some ancient Cthulhu thing, right?
Those are the old ones, right?
The old ones?
Old ones, yeah.
Okay, sorry.
There's the first ones.
What I know about Lovecraft is entirely what is actually shown up in Doctor Who.
Right, that's
so
awesome.
if it didn't make it into Doctor Who, I don't know about it. So my Lovecraft knowledge is very limited. Though there is a lot of Lovecraft in Doctor Who. Anyone who loves Doctor Who and Lovecraft should definitely do a deep dive into that, because there's a lot of Lovecraft in Doctor Who. Public domain, baby. So during these dark times, most sapient species, such as the Arachnos and the Quirm, tended to be much more massive than later aliens that evolved in the future. The Shobogans and the Osirans are the rare exceptions to this rule. Most of the sapient species are big, huge kaiju things.
Like the
vampire. The great vampires. Remember, they were monstrous too. And it has been theorized by the Gallifreyans that there's the continual decay of the gravitational constant of the universe is what made larger species less and less likely as time went on. It's also worth noting that the Lama will eventually fix the gravitational constant at a single value. So before that, it wasn't constant. And this is another deep dive into physics, that for a while there in the 80s, there were attempts to try to come up with a grand unified theory. Right. And it was noticed that a lot of the people could make the math work, but only if the gravitational constant would decay. And every experiment conducted showed that the gravitational constant was fixed. It was constant and it wasn't decaying. So they had to throw out that theory because the math didn't work. However, in the Doctor Who universe, it turns out it was always decaying, but some aliens fixed it with some tech. And so the scientists actually had the right idea when they came up with that equation. They just didn't realize it. And we are going to do a deep dive into the gravitational constant and the Lama, you said, yeah.
I think it's Lama. I don't know. It might be the Lemay. I don't know.
They exist in a novel, so we don't know. That's Lama. Lema. We're going to go deep dive into those guys eventually. We're probably not in all that long. It's not too far away. Or January, maybe we might even get to it by. As one of the first sapient species in the universe, the Shobogan's morphic fields increase the chance of humanoids evolving on other planets. And non-humanoid species will tend to only be found on worlds where humanoids could not survive in the wild. They shape evolution across the cosmos by their morphic fields. And we're going to I think we're going to do an episode on morphic fields at some point and get into that.
Oh, great.
Probably. So the Shobogans biologically looks like they had only one heart, and most deaths, the majority of deaths were caused by heart failure. That heart was a bit of a biological weak point for them. They did have a bypass respiratory system, it looks like. So that was not something that was added in later on. And as near as I can tell, bypass respiratory system seems to, I guess, work by filtering air through the skin so that you don't need to breathe it through your mouth or something, and also enhances the processing and efficiency of the processing of oxygen. When in use, the bypass system, respiratory system, makes them very resistant to most forms of anesthetic, but not chloroform or strangulation. So I'm not sure. With warning, a Gallifreyan can store enough oxygen in their system to be active for 20 minutes. Wow. And they can survive in a vacuum for about 10 minutes. Wow. They can hold their breath for hours if they don't move much, just hold completely still. But they have to remain very completely calm to use the bypass respiratory system. Any pain or unexpected shock will cause them to exhale the air in their lungs and knock them out of the trance or whatever. Shobogans appear to have the same resistance to being frozen solid that modern Gallifreyans do. Which is, you can freeze a Gallifreyan solid and then thaw them out and they'll come back to life. So
that's amazing.
They have something in antifreeze in their blood or something that keeps their cells from being ruptured by the ice crystals. And it turns out that that's something that the Shobogans had as well. That predates Rassilon. It's always a question because Rassilon, the Time Lords or the Gallifreyans get re-engineered yeah, with all the Timeless Child stuff and Tecteun's work in the looms. So a lot of you can't just take for granted that what a Gallifreyan can do in the modern era is something a Shobogan could do in the ancient times. But these are things that I've managed to find a fair amount of evidence that yes, these traits predate the looms. Their blood, hormones, and pheromones of the ancient Shobogans is distinctly different from modern loom-spun Gallifreyans. It's you might if you compared you showed both modern Gallifreyan DNA and biology and a Shobogan biology, a person would probably assume that maybe these people both had a common ancestor, but they appear to be different races, probably maybe even different species, depending on how closely you looked. So I do believe they could. Anyway. The genetics are different enough from humanity that successful interbreeding with humans is rare, but not unheard of. Their children had milk teeth that they eventually lose. They age slower than humans, and it might take hundreds of years for a Gallifreyan to mature into an adult. We do know an 11-year-old Gallifreyan would look like an 8 or 9-year-old human, and a 16-year-old would look like an Earth teenager. But around the 16, their aging starts slowing dramatically because an 80-year-old Shobogan also looks like an 18-year-old human. So Gallifreyans in their teens need as much food as a human teenager would need, if not more. But adult Gallifreyans adult Shobogans seem to eat only about as much as a human does. Young Shobogans need to sleep a little more than most humans do, but after they pass first maturation, they learn to control their bodies and only need about 1 to 2 hours of sleep a day. Well, the Shobogans lack the regenerative power of modern Gallifreyans. Originally, brace yourself, Like all life in the cosmos back then, they could live forever if they avoided accidents.
Oh wow.
Yeah, I didn't even know about this a few months ago. It blew my mind.
That's awesome.
All life in the Doctor Who universe was immortal, barring accidents or murder or kill or death by predator or something. Back then, it was
That's
all immortal.
That's
Nobody
amazing.
died of old age. They died of bad luck or murder.
That's amazing, and they still needed the timeless child.
Well, things are going to change,
Yeah.
but we do know that the rule of the first 508 Pythias, there were 508 of them, and that rule of those 508 spanned 8 million years.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Which means that each of them had to rule for around 16,000 years. But if you're immortal barring accidents, it might take 16,000 years before you trip and fall down the stairs.
Right, exactly.
Especially if you're a ruler with guards and, they can pad the floors. So it might take quite a while for you to accidentally kill yourself if you're living in a safe environment like a ruler like the Pythia would be. So yeah, there's some evidence to support this claim. And what changed this was and I might need your help with this name, Kotura?
Hold on. Let me see where it is. I lost my place.
Oh, okay. Anyway, Kotturuh. So, I think I think I'm saying it right. I don't know. There's some audio drama, so there's probably is a right way to say it. I didn't have time to dig it up, so I apologize. But the Kotturuh were a group of aliens who decided they would bring the gift of death to all of life, and they established lifespans for every species in the cosmos. And they brought death. And we're going to get into more detail with that again when in the episode with the Menti Celesti. We're going to talk a little bit more.
I'm going to say that word is Kotturuh based on the Kotturuh.
I like your version better.
The creepiness.
If it's not Kotturuh in the Big Finish audio, I'm going to be disappointed.
Kotturuh. Also Kotturuh maybe, but
Kotturuh.
Either way, it's an interesting, and that sounds like the kind of scary type of thing like that. What it's kind of cool. It's a nice twist on the apple, like the knowledge, the tree of knowledge and stuff.
Yeah.
Like that.
Yeah, and the Kotturuh, they appear to be from the previous universe before this universe. So if you're wondering, how do they have all this advanced technology? Well, they had a jump start. They had a whole nother universe worth of time to figure out how to do cool stuff. But yes, they brought the gift of death to all life. And after this, official documents and records state that Shobogans had a lifespan of around 300 years.
Was Sutekh a Kotturuh?
Sutekh did a deal with them. He got their powers. He worked out a deal.
That makes sense because Sutekh does bring the gift of death.
Yes. I was like, and the vampires. They were allowed to live forever as long as they brought death to other species because of a deal they did with the Kotturuh. Kotturuh. Anyway, so yes, and all of that, if you're wondering, what I must know more about this, the Time Lord Victorious multimedia extravaganza that they did a few years ago tells the story of this species and their effects. And I can't answer a lot of questions for you because I've been saving the Time Lord Victorious extravaganza and probably spoiled myself a bit by having to stumble across this in the TARDIS Wikipedia. But yes, I do plan to look into that hopefully very soon. But yeah, I haven't listened to it yet. Or read, watched, because they covered every media except TV. I guess they didn't do a role-playing source book, which I was disappointed in. But anyway, so Without the regenerative power of modern Gallifreyans, a Gallifreyan would be confined to a wheelchair before they reach 200 years old. And if somehow their life was prolonged to, say, 700 years, their body would start atrophying until they're only a few feet tall.
Huh.
And we see this.
We see this
in Last of the Time Lords.
That's
where
right.
the master switches off all of the doctor's regenerative capabilities and then hyper ages him. And you see what would happen. They turns into a little person, which doesn't really make any sense. But I mean, nobody's ever, I guess we don't really know a lot about what would happen to a Shobogan. They're aliens. Who knows what would happen? They turn into Dobby. Who'd have thunk? So,
I mean, if humans lived long enough, I feel like we'd probably turn into Dobby too.
Would we really get that small? I don't know
why
why our bones would suddenly. Yeah, but their bones don't actually shrink. They just kind of hunch over and compress, and there's
you do get isn't osteoporosis the whole thing that your bone matter is kind of like eroding, and so
but I don't think that the bones literally get shorter. I think they just get more and more fragile. I think.
I see.
I mean, I could be wrong. I did study physics in college, which means I know nothing about biology. So viewers, if you want to correct me, please put some information in the comments.
I'm just saying, if we evolved to live that long, maybe we would evolve to have shrinking bodies, because the less calories you have to consume at that age, the longer. I don't know. I'm just being a silly goose. Sorry. Carry on.
All right. Well, we do know some other stuff about Shobogans. They were stronger, more athletic, and significantly taller than the average human. Shobogan females tended to be much taller than Shobogan males, very noticeably taller. And the women also tended to have fairly well-developed muscles by human standards. So they were planet of Amazons.
Right.
With all these short little men running around saying, yes, dear. But that isn't sexist. Is that sexist? Maybe I shouldn't have said that. I apologize if that was sexist. But yes, the evolution was a bit different despite their similarity to humans. The women definitely ended up with the upper arm body strength and the height and and ended up being the dominant force in the culture. In the same way that our society is very male driven for most of its history.
I dig that.
Yeah. And until somebody called Rassilon came along, said, enough with these uppity women. We're going to make this all sexist in the other direction now. So, but we'll get to that. All in good time. A common side effect of a species living next to a wormhole over a few centuries is their population will develop psychic powers. And it is known that the Shobogans were much more powerful telepaths due to an organ located in their hypothalamus. They were more powerful even than the Gallifreyans would later be. At around 16 years old, a Shobogan's telepathic powers are still developing, and they're vulnerable to experiencing strong emotions from large groups. Sometimes this causes a psychic feedback where the Shobogan ends up reinforcing the emotions of the people around them. Which can cause, effects. The adult minds of the planet are in a constant telepathic entrelacement. And this was everybody could hear everybody else's thoughts all the time.
Oh, interesting.
And this was thought to be the greatest curse of Shobogan civilization. That nobody had any privacy.
Mm-hmm.
Approximately every 1,000 years, a Shobogan was born who could shield their mind from telepathy, and they had even greater psionic abilities. These were known as individuals because they had an individual mind instead of this kind of hive thing. And they had powers and abilities that in the modern era are considered to be nothing but myth and superstition by modern Gallifreyans. Some were powerful seers and visionaries, and many had telekinetic powers. When children, the individuals also made very good pilots for the early time ships. Because of their ability to focus, older individuals often became great philosophers, scientists, and explorers, and many became heroes, which was an actual job title in the time of the Pythia. So, ancient Shobogans would be virtually extinct a few hundred years after the last Pythia of Gallifrey cursed the entire species with sterility. Fortunately, by that point, Rassilon and his followers had developed an alternative means of reproduction. Over time, the term Shobogan became slang for any Gallifreyan who rejects the tradition and culture of Rassilon's Time Lords.
Just similarly how we sometimes use Neanderthal as a pejorative or something like that.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah, it's pretty basically identical. You Neanderthal.
Yeah.
So
fascinating.
I don't know if that came off as silly or interesting or
no. I'm like the reason I don't have much to say is I'm like kind of like thinking about it. It's like very interesting stuff.
yeah. Discovering regeneration was an attempt to bring immortality back into the Gallifreyan people. So,
right.
After everything had gotten screwed up. So.
Right, and it fits with our like kind of legends and myths as well. And if it's so cool. I like it. I like how there's a lot of opportunities to tell interesting stories and connect it to the like later civilizations. It's very cool.
Yeah, I always thought Big Finish should do do an audio series set back during the dark times. I think they could have a lot of fun with that.
I really do too.
There's a lot of fun stuff to do there, and Gallifreyans are much more exciting and interesting back then, honestly, than what the Time Lords became, sitting around in their city, watching and observing and never doing anything.
Right.
So, well, shall we do the TARDIS feature of the week?
Let's do it. Hold on here.
There we go.
Awesome.
Do you want to read it?
Yeah, let me pull up here. Okay. The auto-cleaning systems. Any object brought into the TARDIS will be replaced with a block transfer duplicate if left alone long enough. Once it is now part of the TARDIS, this block transfer matter can be manipulated and deleted. A TARDIS's auto-cleaning system uses block transfer computations to remove all unnecessary dust, mud, and debris from its interior. If the operator desires, the system can be balanced to allow dust and cobwebs to gather in disused rooms. I don't know why anyone would allow that.
Because it looks spooky and cool and ancient.
Yeah, it's true.
And actually, this might be a good time to say, because Time Lords live so long, their art and architecture is designed to age. A good artist will plan so that it will look aesthetically pleasing 1,000 years from now.
Yeah,
you have to think ahead when the people who buy it might have it for might live for 10,000 years. You need to make sure the objects and art you make are going to age gracefully. So that's cool. Kind of part of that is sometimes cobwebs and dust speaks of ancient power.
So normally the auto cleaning systems keep the interior of the TARDIS is quite sterile, and ensure that the atmosphere is automatically cleaned. There's only one known case of a poorly maintained TARDIS spreading a biological virus from one time zone to another, indicating that a fully functional TARDIS must have some sort of antiviral software. Yeah, that makes sense. The auto-cleaning system's laundry circuits automatically repair, clean, and iron any clothes left overnight in the sleeping quarters or the wardrobe. There is a dedicated laundromat for times when the crew doesn't want to wait overnight for something to be cleaned. That explains why the Doctor wears the same thing every day.
Yes.
Other than this is way better than the holographic clothing. That still creeps me out.
I could tell you some stories about holographic clothes from my Star Trek role-playing game, but that's wildly off topic. So apparently I realized I didn't read this comic properly. Apparently the laundromat is actually the laundromat, probably because it uses block transfer computation to dematerialize the clothes and refabricate them as a new block transfer construct that is completely clean and has all its buttons and stuff. But yes, You just leave the clothes lying around in your room and go to bed, and you'll wake up in the morning and they're all nicely folded and pressed and cleaned and thick repaired. So
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
It's
But it
also
explains a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, it is a little weird. You go into a TARDIS and you take your grandma's necklace and you leave it on your nightstand, and in the middle of the night, the TARDIS takes your necklace away and replaces it with a block transfer copy of it.
That is interesting. What happened? But it's left. If left long enough, is it? Is it just like?
Well, apparently it fixes the clothes overnight, so it
True,
probably
that's true.
changes everything in that amount of. So it's
Can you
probably
then? You can then just take that object though and go. It doesn't need to stay near the TARDIS, right?
It's perfectly stable.
Yeah. So that's interesting.
The celery that the Fifth Doctor was wearing is at least at some point from the created using block transfer. So yeah, it's a little weird and creepy that the TARDIS is basically quietly replaces all your stuff with copies of it that it has control over when you're not looking.
That is weirdly creepy.
And it has to be careful. It has a little software and stuff to make sure it doesn't accidentally replace you with a block transfer copy, which it would know because it's not powerful enough to generate sapient block transfer copies. So, yeah, that's how if you ever wondered how can Tegan keep wearing that air hostess outfit every adventure for two seasons or one season or whatever.
That's the reason why.
That's the reason why.
That's pretty cool.
Time Lord Landro Demat. So, all right. Well, shall we see what the time scanner has to say? I guess, we did pimp out the show already, pimp out the website already, but yeah, let's get on with the time scanner. This thing's plenty long as it is. So, so tuning in, it is saying that next we are going to be doing another Gallifreyan fairy tale. Yes, it is Jack and the Wormhole. Jack and the Wormhole.
Perfect.
So, tune in next time for Jack and the Wormhole, where we delve once again into Time Lord fairy tales and from about ancient Gallifrey. So until then, see you later in these time and relative dimensions in space.
Thank you so much.